No, not really.
Or the belief that more picks is needed or better or anything like that?
No, I don't think it does. We're going to approach this the same way. And look, I say this every year. We're not opposed to backing up if it makes sense to us, but it hadn't made sense to us the last few years.
There's been talk of, arm length for, defensive linemen, especially a guy like Ruben Bain. When you analyze defensive linemen, how much does that kind of play a role into things? And is there, certain circumstances where a player's tape could, overmatch any, quote unquote short arms?
Yeah, I think what, how the guy plays always overrides everything. So let's start with that. But I do think this: we've got a lot of data that tells us what plays in the NFL, and this isn't exclusive to the defensive line. It's all the positions. We know what plays in the NFL, and we have some measurements that we can look at and say, man, that's an outlier. We're not looking for outliers. I say this to our guys. I've said this over the years. If we are looking for exceptions, then we're not going to be here very long, because exceptions are exceptions. So we're not looking for exceptions. But we recognize that there are exceptions. And so if someone has some traits that don't match what plays in the NFL, then we better have some other things that tell us that he can overcome that. And so, that's my answer to that.
Mickey, you sitting at number 8 in this year's draft. How much do you like his position in the draft, and how ideal is it for this particular class?
Well, I don't like it because it means that last year didn't go very well. So you don't want to be picking in the top 10. But once you get to the draft and you look at the quality of the players that exist, you get excited about. I know we're going to get a really good player at pick 8. So you get excited about that, a guy that can have an impact on your team.
Yeah, how do you guys define the unknowns that you can't maybe see on film? Like a guy that you think might be able to rush the passer, but he's only maybe has 20 snaps, so there's someone you think might be able to drop back, but hasn't done a whole lot of it.
Well, I think that gets back to traits versus, what you've actually seen. And look, this is where sometimes the off season comes into play in terms of the workouts, the measurables, the things that tell you, a guy can do something that maybe he hasn't been asked to do yet. And it's a balance, right? It's a balance.
Where do you look at, I guess your thought process is, you talked about the exceptions. Picking in the top 10, you don't do that often. Are you more prone to we follow certain guidelines in the top 10, maybe we could be a little bit more exceptions at 28 than we could at 8?
Yeah, I think for us, we're probably a little more risk averse. When we make a pick there, we want to have a lot of the questions answered about a player. You don't want to pick a player that you have a ton of questions about, and you're just banking on the unknown. So I think as you go farther back in the draft, you're a little more willing to take a chance on someone. But I think when you're in the top 10 or top 12, whatever the number is, you want to pick players that you have as little doubt as possible that they're going to be successful.
Does the timer going from 10 minutes to 8 minutes in the first round change the legwork you have to do on trades and stuff ahead of the draft?
No, I don't really. I don't know yet. We went from 15 to 10 at one point, and I didn't feel like that had a big impact. I don't think it will, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Weighing positions that make this draft a little deeper.
I don't know that I can say that, because deeper than what? Last year or the year before, or, obviously there's fewer quarterbacks being talked about in the first round, so that changes the dynamic a little bit. But, and I hear sometimes, this isn't a very deep draft. I seem like I hear that every year from different people, and I kind of feel like that's a little bit of an excuse that, if the draft doesn't go well. I think there's good players in every draft. I think there's guys that are going to be Pro Bowl type players, and it's our job to identify them, and then hopefully we have an opportunity to take them.
Hey, Mickey, you had your staff, a lot of your staff at the Senior Bowl. Joe Thomas, coach.
Yeah.
Did you feel like you had a head start on everybody else?
Yeah, I think it's look, we did have a lot of coaches at the Senior Bowl and at the East-West game, and look, that's development opportunity for those coaches, but it's a great opportunity for us to get more information on players that are going to be prominent in this draft, and so that was really good for us.
Speaking of things you probably hear every year, a lot of people think next year's draft class is really stacked. Do you try to have a beat on that when you're evaluating?
No, I think it just changes.
Future picks and stuff like that?
Not really. I mean, I'll ask that question now and then of Jeff and say, hey, what does next year look like in terms of a position or overall? But I don't know that it's not that prominent in terms of when we're making those discussions, just because things change so much over the course of the college season.
And on the opposite side of that, the class you had last year, immediate impact guys, not as impactful as like 2017 or 06, but the fact that you had a class with so much immediate impact and got your quarterback, how does that alter or make you want to have a proper class to follow them up this year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it changes anything. We always want to have a great draft class. I thought it was great for our scouts and Jeff and his people to get recognized for last year's success. But it doesn't have any impact on what we're doing this year.
Yesterday, Tyler Shuck talked about like how he's been evaluating receivers. Like, how much input do you all let him have, or like how involved is he in?
Yeah, I mean, look, we'll ask any of our players that have a crossover with someone in this draft, and it's always the young guys that played with someone. If they've played with someone, we talk to them about hey, what kind of guy is he? How did he learn? How did he practice? So we ask questions of all our guys. It wasn't just Tyler. It's everybody on our team that has a crossover with a player that's in this draft that we may have an interest in.
How many scenarios do you guys prepare for? Like, what's your,
How many mock drafts do we do?
Yeah, and
Like 100.
When there's new trade rumors, do you go back and then start looking through different scenarios and how things might?
Yeah, a little bit. And look, here's one great thing about the technology now. We can just push a button and do mock drafts. We don't have to, bring all of our scouts in a room and assign them teams, and then they make the pick. We have this technology that allows us to do these mock drafts, and we do a lot of them. We do. And so there's a lot of different scenarios, particularly in the mid to later rounds, because that's where it gets a little, I don't want to say dicey, but that's probably the only word I can think of as to what may happen.
Sean Payton's involvement in the draft was pretty obvious, and then it seemed like Dennis Allen as well, and he had been here for so long in the collaborative. What was your philosophy, and what is your philosophy when you bring in Kellen Moore, new to the organization, never been a head coach? Are you right away I want you to have as strong a voice in this as anyone? Is it more this year than last year? How
it was no different than when Sean first got with us, right? He was a new coach, and I want the coaches involved. I want them. I want to get their perspective, and if we have differences, between the personnel department and the coaching staff, we got to get those ironed out before we pick a player. Our goal is to all be on the same page in terms of the players that we bring in here, because that gives them and us the best chance for them to be successul, in my opinion.
When it comes to weighing things, with what y'all were able to accomplish in free agency, has that shifted anything with just how you're evaluating some prospects? What maybe you'd be looking for more out of that, especially with the number 8 pick? I assume you want to be a starter on the team. Yeah,
I think it certainly affects us in terms of as we get later in the draft. You're trying to fill slots on your roster. I don't think it impacts us so much at the top of the draft, because we're looking to take the best player that's available to us when we pick. But as I've said before, generally speaking, there's when it's time to pick, you've got 2 or 3 guys that you're choosing from that are all in that same grade area, and then you look at your roster and say, hey, we need somebody at this position more than the other one. So it definitely impacts it, but it's not like the only impact.
You start off of that.
Things that are kind of premium and non-premium positions, as people like to talk about
Yeah.
oftentimes. Slot corner is usually defined as
Yeah.
non-premium. Is that different for you all because of how Brandon Staley uses that position in his defense?
Maybe a little bit. I wouldn't say it's significantly different, but yeah, maybe. But I'd say maybe a little different. Yes, I mean you have to pay attention to the schemes you're running and what your coaching staff values in terms of what they're trying to get accomplished. So yeah, it does have some impact.
I noticed in Baton Rouge, you chat with Mansour Delane. You were there for his impressive pro day. What did you think of him, and what kind of addition do you think he would add to an NFL team?
Yeah, look, I don't want to get into a discussion about specific players, but look, I had a good talk with him. He's an impressive young man. I talked to him about some of the things that he was doing, in the offseason, and look, he was great. He had great answers, and obviously a really good player that's going to get taken high.
Going back to the draft philosophy now, due to what you did in free agency, the fact that you address so many needs, how much does that free you up to get best player available instead of just best player we need?
Yeah, I think I've said this in prior years. Our goal in the offseason is always to be in the position where we can take, particularly at the top of the draft, the best player available. And if we have to build a strength on our team, then that's okay. And so I think this year, probably as much as any year, we were able to do a few things that allows us to do that.
However, I guess historically in the league, you see trades up for quarterbacks, knowing that I assume there's a quarterback going 1, and then after that, talks may not be about quarterbacks. Has that been different for you all or other teams, or just historically what you've seen because people aren't moving up for the quarterback?
I don't know yet because I think most of those calls start coming, today and tomorrow before the draft, more so than prior to. Obviously, we've heard from some teams about teams that, hey, we might want to move back here. A few teams that might want to move up, not just in the first round, but in the second as well. It remains to be seen. How much of that activity occurs, but I wouldn't say it's a lot different than the past. But again, picking in the top 10 is a different thing than picking in the middle or back half of the round. So you get fewer calls when you're back there as opposed to when you're in the top 10.
How do you evaluate a prospect that might be dealing with an injury during the pre-draft process?
Yeah, I think that's difficult sometimes because you don't have as much information, so it creates more questions, right? But I think, at the combine, the medical people do a really good job of assessing injuries, so we have a pretty good handle on guys that are hurt and what their timelines are. But there may be some unanswered questions in terms of some of these measurables that we value.
There was a report that Nussmeier is going to spend the draft with his son until he gets drafted.
Yeah.
Is that a situation where he still kind of works from afar and you'll call to get his opinion, or being the situation so rare, do you just kind of let him unplug and?
Yeah, no, listen, Doug's going to be available to us, and his input's valuable. We've gotten most of that. Look, all these questions that may come up in the draft are mostly answered, and so. I don't anticipate a lot of questions coming at, when we're on the clock or during the draft, but I know Doug will be available and when we value his input.
What was the attention of division pros, what they're doing?
Not much, really. I mean, we note it, obviously, but we don't have any control over that, so, it is what it is, really.
How did the decision to let Doug spend it with Derek kind of come about? Was it Colin's idea, your idea? Like, how did that kind of...
I don't know. That's a good question. But look, I get that. I advise him to spend it with Garrett. It's a once in a lifetime opportunity.
How do you think the draft may impact with what you guys want to do with Alvin or a guy like Cam, to some
Yeah.
unsettled guys?
Yeah, I think that it could impact it. We'll see what happens. And that goes both ways. That may impact them from their perspective as well as ours. That it?
Where
That
do you
was
think it's
short
gonna
and
stand with
quick.
Alvin? Just-
Yeah, we don't want to get into any of that right now. We'll do that after the draft. We got a lot of questions that we got to get answered over the next few days relative to our roster, and then we'll go from there.
I was going to ask about Cam Jordan and Taysom Hill. Has there been any resolution, or they fall in the after the draft?
Yeah, look, those are two-way questions, right? They have things that they have to determine, and we do too. So we'll see what happens after the draft.
Mickey, you were saying in the first round, you got 2 or 3 guys with the same kind of grade. As
Yeah.
the draft goes on, 3rd, 4th, 5th round, is that bullpen of players grow a little bit?
Yeah, I think. Well, you hope it does. I mean, when we get to the 5th and 6th round, I'm hoping that we have 4 or 5 guys that we can choose from. But sometimes, you get down there and there's one guy that stands out above all the rest. But you're hoping that you have 4 or 5, because then, the holes that you have on your roster come into play.
So what do you think last year's success with the draft? I mean, it was like one of the rare years you didn't trade at all. I mean, was it just having more picks the merrier? Or was there something about the process that?
I don't know. I mean, we made some trades in 06, and that was a pretty good draft. And I don't remember if we made trades in 17 or not, but that was a good draft too. So, I've said this before, man. If we love somebody and we feel like it's necessary to make a move, then we're going to do that.
What do you think of the receiver depth in this draft this year?
Yeah, look, I think it's good. It's what I said before. There's going to be good players in this draft, no matter what you think about that depth. And it's up to us to get them identified, and then hopefully, we have the opportunity to take those guys. But I do think there's a lot of good receivers in this draft.
I touched on this a little bit earlier, but are you ever able to kind of get a sense before the draft that there is going to be a lot of moving pieces, trades being made, et cetera? Does that ever kind of play out the way you envision it doing, or?
I don't know that I would say it that way. I think there's times when, yeah, it's a good question, but I don't really think of it in those terms. I'm more focused on what we're doing, not what everyone else is doing. And I think the higher up you get, the more you're focused on what you're doing, not what everyone else is doing. And if an opportunity comes up, then we look at it, regardless of whether that's an opportunity to move up or move down. And then we'll make an assessment that makes sense for us or not.
Those conversations typically start happening about 97.
Yeah, they're going to happen over the next couple, today and tomorrow before the draft. You're going to get a real sense. And we already have, a couple of teams that we've talked to that, more than a couple actually, that have, and really those conversations are just simply, hey, we'd like to move down or we want to move up. And then we'll have a discussion in the next 24 hours about, okay, what's the cost of that, or what are we getting for that? And then you have, you kind of make this call in your mind about, yeah, I do that for that. And then we wait and see what's available, when we're on the clock.
Yeah, that was going to be.
There's a lot of moving parts in here.
So it's sometimes contingent on okay, if this happens and we're re-engaging these conversations.
I think it's almost always contingent upon, because you're not trading up for the spot, you're trading up for a player. And so it's always, okay, is the player available?
What's your read on the top 7 picks in this first year in this draft? Do you think there's 6 guys that'll go in the top 7, or do you think this is one of those draft classes where?
Who's the top 7?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Do you feel like there's a consensus there, or do you think, are your scenarios it could be pretty random in that group this year, based on what teams do in front of you?
Yeah, it's a good question. I certainly don't think that all 32 teams have the same 7 guys listed from 1 to 7. And I don't know what the other teams are, what their lists look like. I know what our list looks like. So I don't really pay attention to that much. It's a good question. It's just I don't have enough information to answer it really.
I know you joked about never having traded back, always traded up, and you joke about there could be.
I've traded back.
In the first round, sorry, in the first round. In the first round.
Yeah.
It's been like 20
All right.
years.
All right. I'll go with that.
But just hypothetically.
Can't deny the facts.
Sorry, hypothetically, would it be like our cloud of players, things happened and they're not there, or the offer's just so amazing?
Yeah, it'd be either or.
Okay.
It'd be, the scenarios would be, okay, we're at pick 8 and we've got 4 guys that we love. And so we could go back to as far as 12. If there's 2 that we love, then we could only go back, 2 spots, right? Or someone comes in and says, we'll give you 3 first-round picks to move. Yeah. May have to do that, right? So it's either or. But I'm not someone that just wants to trade just to have a transaction. It's got to be really specific as to what we're getting.
How much does the,
And some of that, by the way, comes into play about who are you trading with and what's their likelihood that pick is going to be late the next year versus earlier. And so all that comes into play when we're, making that assessment.
yeah, that's what I was going to follow up with. How much do the, say, trade terms change from year to year? In other words, hypothetically, we're going to trade up to number 3 this year.
Mm-hmm.
Do you look at past years and what that cost, or could it change every year according to what
Yeah.
the draft is?
That's a good question. I think history is a really valuable tool for us, right? So we've got the history of trades, and I pore over that. We have guys that pore over it, and then we have these point charts, right? Which I think the good thing is almost all the teams use these point charts now to value. At least that's the starting point. And if we're all on the same point chart, which we all always aren't. That's the starting point. And then you look at, hey, what historically has it taken? And then it becomes a matter of market, right? Some years there's a lot of teams that want to move back and not very many want to move up. And so that's an advantage for the team moving up because, the markets dictates a better cost.
Mickey, you said sometimes you consider if you're trading with another team for a future pick, where you think they're going to be drafting next year.
Yeah.
If you trade your pick next year, what pick will that be in your mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're not going to trap me on that one.
Are you trading
32. I think it's going to be pick 32.
So you're going to trade.
I'm going to go with that.
Trading pick 32.
Yeah, that's what I'm going with.
When you're talking about being risk adverse earlier, does that change how you feel about potentially trading into the top 5? That cost to get a premium type of pick?
No, I mean if you're trading into pick 5, that's you're not looking for risk. You're looking for the sure thing, right? So I guess in that sense, yeah, maybe a little bit, but I like the spot we're in. I know we're going to get a good player. So I can't really answer that till.
Was it Deion Jordan that year that trade up? Actually, that was Jeff. Was that the cheapest it's ever been? Was that year an extreme outlier, or there have been others where?
Well, it's funny. We've talked about this a little bit because when I was in Seattle, Randy, we had pick 10 and 11, and we ended up with pick 3 and 6, and the cost for those total moves were really good relative to today's prices. And, we ended up drafting Sean Springs and Walter Jones with those 2 picks, and that was a pretty good deal. Really good deal.
Has it?
But, it's different now. I think, the cost is higher, generally speaking.
Has that risk-averse philosophy changed over the years based on players that may or may not have worked out, or is it, as you were saying earlier, more based on picking higher or lower?
I think we're always affected by what we've done in the past, and I got a long past, so I think it definitely affects you. We relate to a lot of what we do is comparison, right? This player compared to that player, this deal compared to, a deal that we've done in the past. And so, those ones that didn't work out definitely affect, our thinking to some degree.
Can you, just talking about that a little bit, when you talk about your history, I'm sure there's been years here where, when you had Drew in his prime, it's like step on the gas and go all in now.
Yeah.
Versus maybe where you are right now in kind of balancing being aggressive versus being patient.
Yeah, is there a question there?
Yeah, I just, what is your philosophy on that? Having done it for a long time, maybe where are you right now? In how, is it hard to be patient knowing that you may not to say, I know you said you want to pick 32, but knowing that where you are right now?
Well, I would say it this way. When you have a Drew Brees, right, when you have that caliber of quarterback, you're always feeling like you're one player away, right? And so, man, let's go get the one player. And when you have a young quarterback and you're developing your roster, then you're not one player away. So you're less inclined to give up, a number of assets to get, one player. That's probably the best way I can describe it.
Well, where are you guys though? I mean, after the success you had late last
year. Yeah, we're not one player away.
But when you were just describing that, I mean, are you closer to pushing the gas after the way last season ended, or not necessarily?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say. I mean, that's a 5-game stretch, right, or 6-game stretch. So I don't want to read too much into that. We're excited. We're optimistic about our future, but we're not. By no means have we arrived anywhere.
We have time for 2 or 3 more.
Mickey, I don't know if you've thought a lot about this at all, but like with NIL, with the COVID year, some players coming out after 6-7 years in college, 25-year-old prospects, has that like changed how you're having to evaluate some of these guys, where maybe it's a little bit different than it was 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword, right? Because, and we're talking about the age of the players.
Yep.
On the one hand, look, there's probably less opportunity for, a big development with the older player. On the other hand, we've got a lot more information, and we can do a better job evaluating. And so I don't necessarily think it's a good or bad thing. I just think it's something we're going to have to deal with, these guys. And I think overall it's a good thing that they stay in college and develop, and they have the opportunity to, one of the things about the NIL is these guys, their earning years have expanded, right? Because it's not just earning, it doesn't just happen in the pros, it happens in college too, and that's a good thing for these guys. So it's just something we have to deal with, and I think we've done a good job of that. But the positive thing is we get more information.
What are the things that make you, or make an NFL team, remove a player from a board or want to avoid a player from a risk perspective?
Oh man, it can be a lot of things. Really, it can have to do with practice habits or character. It can happen, injury history. I mean, there's just so many things, and maybe just the fit of the player. There may be a player that doesn't fit in our particular scheme, and as good as we think he is, he just doesn't fit for what we're trying to get accomplished. So it can be a lot of things. It's never just one thing.
Does that dynamic kickoff rule, does that add like a different element to, like, especially day 3 for guys who maybe are like a one skill set type of player who can, like would you be able to get like a Rashid Shaheed or whatever in as a priority free agent versus now?
Yeah, I think that's more dependent upon what your roster looks like. But look, we have to we pay attention to special teams, and the kickoff rules changes have affected a little bit the makeup of your roster in that regard. And so I wouldn't say it's a big deal, but it is, it is a variable. All right, thank you guys.